We're good. Tommy, we're good. All right, welcome to OLC 40, week 9, class 32. This is exam prep. I'm sorry for the delay. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty here, but we should be okay now. Um, these are all the ways to reach me. I am in the studio, 1-800-465-7144. I will be at the studio. I'll be in the office for about an hour afterwards. 1-800-667-3703. My email is jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You can find this recording at gpercy space WASA and submit your assignments to student.work@nnec.on.ca. Please remember to put your full name, lesson number, assignment name, and the course. I get a lot of assignments. Okay, so we are going to cover this because I definitely noticed some things about this kind of topic on the exam. So I wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. Okay. So an idiom is a type of phrase or expression that has a meaning that can't be deciphered by just looking at the individual words. It's not literal. So, for example, if I say somebody can't see the forest for the trees, that's an idiom used to describe someone who's too involved with the details of a situation and they just can't see the bigger picture at hand. So we're going to try and learn how to understand some of those idioms. There are four main types of idioms. One is called pure idiom. That is the typical idiom, the meaning of which you just can't figure it out by its individual components. So when somebody says spill the beans, they're asking you to reveal a secret, not pour out a can of beans. But you wouldn't be able to tell that just by looking at the phrase. Today we might say spill the tea. Binomial idiom. This is one that doesn't even seem like idiom to me, but I think is one of those things that sometimes when you're translating from one language to another, doesn't always make sense. So things like by and large, do's and don'ts, heart to heart. Partial idiom. That's an idiom or sometimes kind of a proverb that has been shortened into one part with everybody kind of knowing what the second part is because they're used to it. So people will often use the partial idiom, oh, well, when in Rome, with the understanding that the other person knows the second part, do as the Romans do, which is sort of an idiom talking about, you don't just follow your own customs when you're someplace you do whatever people do there. And then a prepositional idiom, which we talked about a little bit when we did prepositions. And that is where a phrase combines a verb and a preposition to create kind of a new verb with a distinct meaning. So, for example, if you use the phrase agree on, it means that you share an opinion with somebody. But if you look at that literally, on doesn't make a whole lot of sense there. You're not getting physically on something. And yet we all know, hey, can we agree on this means can we get some cooperation? Can we come onto the same page? There's another idiom. And think the same thing or do the same thing about this particular topic, basically. So idiom versus cliche. A cliche can be an idiom, but idioms are not always cliches. Cliches are just expressions or phrases. They're used so much, they've begun to lose their meaning and they indicate a lack of original thought. We use them a lot when we're talking, but we're not supposed to use them so much when we're writing. But for example, there are a few people who feel better if you say, hey, don't worry, there are plenty of fish in the sea. That's an idiom, right? Fish in the sea. Why would you care about fish when you've just broken up? Well, because it's an idiom that means, hey, don't worry, there's always other people to get involved with, right? But it's also a cliche because it's been used so often. So some other examples of cliches are every cloud has a silver lining. When one door closes, another door opens. Today is a new day. There's no use crying over spilt milk. It is cold as ice today. This feels soft as a cloud. One man's trash is another man's treasure. So this, for example, one man's trash is another man's treasure. That may be a cliche. We've heard people say it, but it's not really idiom. You kind of get the idea, right? It's all can be understood in a literal fashion just by what the words mean. Okay. Um, Idiom versus proverbs. Proverbs can be kind of similar. They're not always deciphered easily by looking at the individual words, but it's different because it's used to give advice. I don't think that's the only thing. Proverbs often almost like the punchline of a story. And we've heard the punchline so often, everybody kind of knows what it means, unless you haven't heard the story or kind of the whole idea behind it. Um, and again, Proverbs get said a lot. So some things would be many hands make light work, strike while the iron is hot. Honesty is the best policy. Now, that's one that's an example of that's a proverb. It's not really an idiom, right? There's nothing non literal about that. We get it. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Now, there's an idiom because obviously, if you just jump from one fence to the other, the grass isn't going to change color. They mean idiomatically, whatever's not in your yard always looks a little bit better than what you've got. Don't judge a book by its cover. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Better late than never. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Proverbs can be really straightforward. So, for example, a penny saved is a penny earned, just means, if you don't spend the penny, then it's almost like you've earned the penny because you've got it. It's not really non literal, it's meant to capture a universal truth. Okay, so here are some examples of idiom or cliche or both. So some cliches originated from a certain idiom, but they've gotten used so often they've kind of lost a bit of their charm or their oomph. But not all idioms are considered cliches. All that glitters is not gold. Is that an idiom, or is it a cliche, or is it both? That one I say is tricky. It's definitely a cliche. Is it really an idiom? All that glitters is not gold. I feel like that's literal. That's not non-literal. Two birds with one stone. Well, that's the idea. That's the phrase of you can kill two birds with one stone. You can get two things done with one activity. That is a cliche, but it's also an idiom, so it would be both. Don't sit on the fence. Sitting on the fence is an idiom that means like you can't just never choose sides. You have to just kind of pick a side sometimes. Is that an idiom? Yes. Is it a cliche? I don't know if I'd call it a cliche. I'd call it more of an idiom. Read between the lines. Okay, that is definitely an idiom, and I do not think it's considered a cliche. It's just an idiomatic usage. A damsel in distress. That is definitely a cliche. It's become an idiom, right? If I say, oh, she's always acting like a damsel in distress, we know we're talking about like a reference to fairy tales where there's girls who are in trouble and need someone to rescue them. So I think it's kind of both. And then the phrase, shut up and take my money, it's kind of a newer phrase. It's definitely a cliche. Um, is it an idiom? I've usually seen it in the course of somebody liking so much that they really are just like, yes, I want that. Stop talking, you don't need to sell me anymore. So I don't know if it's a cliche, if it's an idiom. I'm going to call it a cliche, but not necessarily an idiom. So does it really matter if it's one or the other? Probably not. It's just good to kind of be aware that they mean slightly different things. Um, the big thing is if you find yourself reading and you're feeling a little confused, stop and think about it because there's a good chance you're seeing an idiom then. It's something that just doesn't translate easily, and you may have to kind of think about it a little bit. Um, I was looking for idiom lists to share with you guys, but it's kind of tricky because there's so many out there. And some of the idioms seem really easy, and I think most people will know them, but I'm not sure. And some are more obscure than others and might not be as obvious. And it depends a little bit because I know we have a really wide range of students, different ages, different communities. Some communities or some families may use English a lot. Others may switch back and forth, and others may really primarily speak Ojibwe or Ojibwe. So idioms that might seem really common to one person might seem easy to the next person. So I wasn't really sure. So A lot of these, I think, are used so much in everyday speech that I think most people would know them, but others are more unusual. Like there's one here, it's called hang on, bite the bullet. And they say it's to get something over with because it's inevitable. I wouldn't say it's necessarily inevitable. It's the idea that it's going to be unpleasant, uncomfortable, maybe even painful. So in a sentence, you might say, like, oh, my knee hurts all the time these days. I think I just need to bite the bullet and have that knee surgery. So it's like it's going to be unpleasant. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to hurt, but I've got to do it. Some other ones they've got are a blessing in disguise. It was a good thing that seemed bad at first. A dime a dozen. There's a whole bunch of them. You can buy them really easily. Beat around the bush when you're avoiding saying what you want because it's kind of uncomfortable. Better late than never. I don't know if it's really an idiom or not. Bite the bullet. We talked about that. Break a leg. That's kind of a drama expression saying good luck. Call it a day. Oh, we are done. Let's call it a day. Usually it's been you're working on something, often the idea that you've worked really hard or it's in a tangle and you just need to stop and try to get another day. Cut somebody some slack, like don't be so critical of them. Cut corners when you're doing something poorly in order to save time or money. Easy does it. It's like slow down. Don't get out of hand. Don't get out of control. Get something out of your system. Do the thing you've been wanting to do so you can move on. So a lot of those I feel like are probably pretty familiar. These are some ones that I found that I think are maybe not as familiar. Kick the bucket's become pretty common. But the phrase, what's that got to do with the price of onions? Or what's that got to do with the price of fish? It's the idea of you're talking with somebody and then somebody says something doesn't seem to be matching what everybody else is talking about. That's one that I feel like is kind of like an older person phrase. I don't know. My mom would totally say that. If I said something that she thought kind of was weird or unusual in a conversation, she would be like, what's that got to do with the price of fish? But my younger brother, for example, would never say that. To drop the ball, gosh, that's so common. I feel like people know what it means. A different kettle of fish. So the example they use is wanting a car is one thing, paying for it is a whole different kettle of fish. And the idea being that you're saying something's very different, but I think difference kind of inherent in that it's things that sound like they might be kind of similar, but actually are really different. Happy as a pig in muck. When those kids are in the swimming pool, they're happy as a pig in muck. That is kind of a metaphor, but it's also an idiom in the sense that it's gotten used so often that people have kind of a general concept of it, and it's not necessarily literal. Barking up the wrong tree. When you've come to a mistaken conclusion, if you think it was me that ate the last brownie, you're barking up the wrong tree. Or, if you're trying to borrow money off of me, you are barking up the wrong tree. And it means you've made a mistake and you're trying to get something from a person that's just the wrong person to try and get it from. A chip on your shoulder. That's one I think has become a little more common. The idea that you've got kind of a grudge or you're a little bit angry is often called a chip on your shoulder. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth. I don't know if people use that one very often. It's the idea that somebody's wealthy. They were born into the money. So they were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. A wild goose chase. Saints means a wild goose chase is a way that's describing something like it's hopeless. You're trying to get something that you're just never going to find. Let the cat out of the bag. To let out a secret accidentally. The greatest thing since sliced bread. It's usually kind of like, I love this. It's a new invention. It's awesome. It's a little bit funny when people say that one though. Walking on eggshells. Again, this is one I think has become more common. The idea that you're being super careful around somebody because you're trying not to make them mad. I'm walking on eggshells. Beat around the bush, we talked about. Piece of cake. That's really common these days, I think. Like something super easy. It's a piece of cake. Or once in a blue moon. Something that happens every now and again. Like, don't expect this every day. It's just a once in a blue moon kind of thing. How do you recognize that something is an idiom? Generally, you might realize when you're reading a passage that it's an idiom when you read it and think, oh, that makes no sense. Or sometimes you might just suddenly feel confused and you can't figure out why. If that happens when you're reading, step back and take a look at the phrase or the sentence that sounded weird. And what could it mean in the context of this sentence or paragraph or this situation? So, for example, if I said the garage was so full that cleaning it was going to be a long row to hoe, what? That sentence made sense until I got to the last few words. Long row to hoe. What are they talking about? Well, this spelling of hoe means it's a garden tool. It kind of looks like a shovel that's bent. I put a little picture there for you. This makes me think of gardening or farming where things get planted in rows. So having a long row to hoe would take a long time and sounds like it would be a lot of work. So if I try the sentence with that translation in mind, does it make sense? So let's try it. The garage was so full that cleaning it was going to be a lot of work. Yeah, that makes sense. So now I know that that idiom means a lot of work. So that's something to do if you come across an idiom or like a strange phrase in English that you're not quite sure what it means. Try and think of a substitute phrase and see if that phrase works instead. Okay, that we won't have time for because we had our late start. Okay, more exam prep. Some sections of the exam will involve reading an article and then answering questions. Some of the questions will be multiple choice, and other questions involve writing out a longer answer. There isn't really space or time to do the entire writing process, but you're going to want to take a few minutes to brainstorm your ideas before you start writing anything. So let's take a practice run at this kind of exercise. So here is an article. This is actually a pretty current article, and it is called Ransomware Attack at Southwestern Ontario Hospitals Compromises Patient and Employee Data. The data of certain patients and employees have been compromised due to a ransomware attack, several Southwestern Ontario hospitals say. In a joint statement released on Tuesday, Blue Water Health, Chatham Kent Health Alliance, Erie Shores Healthcare, Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare, and Windsor Regional Hospital and their shared service provider, Transform Shared Service Organization, confirmed that they had been targeted in a cybersecurity incident. Working with leading cybersecurity experts, we have determined through our investigation that unfortunately certain patient, employee, and professional staff data have been taken. And there is the possibility that the actors responsible for this attack may publish some of the stolen data. The statement read, "We continue to investigate the exact data impacted, and any individuals whose data was affected by this cyber attack will be notified in accordance with the law. Some online services at the hospital have been down since October 24. Fourth, according to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, a ransomware attack involves cyber criminals using malicious software to encrypt, steal, or delete a user's or an organization's data and then demand payment to restore it. The center said ransomware is the most common threat Canadians face and is on the rise. It noted that the attack can have severe impacts, including core business downtime, permanent data loss, intellectual property theft, privacy breaches, reputational damage, and expensive recovery. So that's the end of the article. And here are some questions. Now, one thing I want to point out is sometimes people feel like it's cheating to go back and look if they aren't sure of the answer, but it's absolutely not. That's where, remember, we practiced skimming and scanning during a test. That is the perfect time to practice skimming and scanning. So here it says a ransomware attack is A, software that encrypts data and demands payment to fix it. B, software that steals data and demands payment to fix it. C, software that deletes data and demands payment to fix it. Or D, all of the above. If I'm not sure, I'm going to go back and reread it and make sure I'm sure before I answer. So let me see. A ransomware attack involves criminals using malicious software to encrypt, steal, or delete a user's data. Okay, so it is all of the above. Let's look at the next one. In this attack, patient, employee, and professional data was taken. Hospital financial records were taken. Hospital rebuilding plans were taken, or electronic equipment was jammed. Let's go back and check. Data. Oop. Certain patient and employee and professional data has been taken. There's nothing here about rebuilding plans or financial records, and nothing about equipment being jammed. There was something about something not working. Oh, but it's online services. So it's not quite the same thing as electronic equipment. It's not the equipment, it's software. So this is the most truthful answer. Okay. If it also said and online services, that would be perfect. Right now, this is the best answer I can pick. Sometimes it'll do that. It isn't the perfect answer, but it's the best you can choose. In this article, the word malicious means A, something that tastes delicious, B, acting with intent to harm, C, a certain type of equipment failure, D, an example of hospital data. Now, this one is tricky. I can't go back and check because it doesn't say. I can take a look and see if the sentence helps me. Malicious. Where does it talk about being malicious? Malicious software. So it's a word describing the software, and the software is basically doing kind of bad stuff. Does that help me at all? Something that tastes delicious, acting with intent to harm, a certain type of equipment failure, an example of hospital data. Well, it's got to be B or C, a certain type of equipment failure. But again, you know what? It's not really equipment, is it? It's data. So acting with intent to harm, malicious software, I think I'm going to use that one. So what do you do if you stumble across a word you don't know in a testing situation? I guarantee you it will happen. Sometimes you can simply ignore the word. It doesn't always, not always important. But other times, a word that you're unfamiliar with might be a key part of a question. Or, just like we just did, you may be asked to choose a correct definition from several choices. So, first, check the other parts of the sentence. Can you make a reasonable guess as to a synonym for the word based on the grammar and the tone of the sentence? For example, her loquacious new friend had her ears ringing, and she could hardly get a word in edgewise. What does the word loquacious mean? Is it A, mean-spirited, B, loud, C, helpful, D, talkative? Now, all of those are adjectives. So it could be any one of those. So I've got to look at the rest of the sentence to figure out. So looking at the sentence, it says that her new friend is hurting her ears. That's that whole phrase of her ears are ringing. That means they're hurting. And she can hardly get a word in edgewise, so she's not getting a turn to speak. So that makes me think that the choice might be talkative. So this is what you're going to have to do if you come across a word in a story that you don't know and they ask you a question about it. Okay. Let's take a quick look here. Okay, we'll just do a couple. It goes on for a little while, but we've kind of lost a little bit of our time. So I don't know if that's going to happen.
When your dealer services your cat.
Huh. Okay. I'm going to pause it. I don't have any sound, probably because we had to restart the computer. So I've, something's kind of gone a little bit wrong. I apologize. I'm going to move on from that. Maybe we'll get a chance to practice that tomorrow. Hang on. I'm just going to put a quick little star on it. So I remember that I didn't do it today. Oops. We'll do a heart. That's easiest right now. Okay. So thinking ahead, what kind of reading formats have we worked with? We've worked with news articles, informational texts, opinions and editorials, procedurals or how to's, and narratives, which is kind of a story format. What are some of the characteristics of each text type? How would knowing the format change how you read the text? So let's go through these. Newspaper format. A newspaper format starts with a headline, which is like the title. Then there's a byline. The byline is who wrote it. And then it always tries to cover the first five, the five W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Then it will do some important details, and then it will do less important details. There might be a caption with a picture. The purpose is to inform people. They're going to tell you facts about the event. It might include dates. It might include quotes from the people involved. How does knowing it's a news article affect how I read it? Well, I already know all the important information is going to be up top. The less important details are going to be near the bottom. That helps me when I'm answering questions because I know where to look. The writer should be telling facts only, and there shouldn't be really any opinions by the writer. However, the people the writer talks to might voice their opinion and the writer might quote them. So that might help me. Okay, narrative formats. The narrative format, we talked about this, is kind of the plot diagram. The beginning of the story is where the character and the settings are introduced. Then there's the rising action where the main character faces a series of conflicts. The climax is the most exciting part of the story. It's often like the big fight, the big chase, the big scene where the problem's getting solved. And then the following action is it's becoming less exciting. They've kind of resolved the big conflict, but they're tying up all the loose ends. And then the very flat part is here's the end of the story. So how does knowing a text is in a narrative format change how I read it? Well, narratives can be fictional and non-fictional, so they can be imaginary or true. So the first thing I want to do is figure out what type of narrative it is. Then I know that certain elements are going to come at the beginning. The setting, the characters, and the problem are often going to be introduced right away. And it works in reverse too. If I am immediately being told setting, characters, and problem, oh, well, that's a good hint that this might be a narrative story. The middle is where I will find most of my conflict and the various obstacles will get in the way. And then at the end or near the end is where the problem is going to get solved. Procedural text. I couldn't find any super pretty pictures. This is my own little picture. Procedural texts generally have like three main parts. Up top is going to tell you the title of what is being taught, and it's like how to fix your car in 5 easy steps, how to create great Halloween costumes, that kind of thing. And then it's going to list ingredients or the materials or the tools, like you're going to need 3 cups of flour and 2 cups of water, or you're going to need 3 wooden dowels and 6 4-inch long screws. And then it's going to have a list of steps needed to complete the task. So how does knowing the format is a procedural text change how you read the text? I know the writing is more likely to be in a list format, and up top might be just single words. I know it's probably going to list measurements or amounts. I also know the steps are going to be written in the form of commands where the verbs come first. For example, cut the wood into 5-foot sections, or blend the chocolate chips into the dough with a spatula. And I also know the steps are going to be listed in order. So if I had a question that said, hey, what do you do near the end of trying to, how to make a quilt? I'm going to go right away to the very last step and see what it says. Or, if I know what ingredients do you need to bake a chocolate cake, I'm going to go to the middle where it should tell me all the ingredients. So knowing the format helps me know where to look for things when I'm trying to answer questions on a test. Opinion articles or opinion letters. This is kind of the similar sort of diagram that I saw, which is up top, you kind of start off vague and get down to the main point. It could be a sentence or it could be a paragraph stating the opinion. Then you list your main arguments. Might be a couple sentences, might be 5 or 6 sentences for each argument. And then you have a closing sentence or a closing paragraph restating the opinion in some way. Okay. So how does knowing a text is stating an opinion change how I read it? Well, I want to make sure I know what the opinion is. I want to make sure I can tell which parts are facts and which parts are opinions. I want to be able to identify what the arguments are. And a good place to look is going to be the first sentence of each paragraph. I want to think about whether I agree or disagree with their opinion. I also want to think about whether I think the arguments or proofs that a person uses seem valid or invalid to me. So, how is this useful? Well, if I was trying to summarize an opinion article, the first place I'm going to look is, what's my opening sentence? What's my closing sentence? What's the first sentence in these ones? And because I know that format, that's going to help me write a summary more effectively, right? Let's see, where are we at? Informational texts. Informational texts can have a lot of different structures, so it can be hard to present a universal format. Some examples of informational texts might be history or science textbooks. Magazines like the National Geographic or Smithsonian might be other examples of informational text. How can knowing that a piece of writing is an informational text help me read that text? Well, I'm going to use what I know about nonfiction text features to help me understand the text and what I'm reading. For example, do the headings and subheadings break the topic down into smaller parts? They often do. They're often almost like an opening sentence and kind of introduces the idea of what they're going to talk about next. They're really useful. More so than people realize. A lot of people kind of skip them. Are there any diagrams or photographs that help me understand the content better? If I was reading like a long article on the manufacturing process of an auto plant, I might have a hard time picturing everything in my mind as to the steps or how the factory looks. A good diagram might really help me understand what I'm reading a lot better. If I see words in bold or in italics, I'm going to know those words are important. That's why they've done that. If there's difficult words, I'm going to look around. Is there a glossary at the back? Or is there a sidebar where they look them up? Sometimes they might put those words in brackets. So knowing that something is an informational text can help me know where to look for information when I'm writing a text. It also helps me if I'm doing a summary, because then I know I'm looking for my main points. I'm not looking for arguments, I'm not looking for storylines. I'm looking for like the big ideas. Summaries. Summaries are where you read a text and you create a shortened version of the original text that you think or believe captures the main information, arguments, or steps of the original article. Any type of format can be summarized. Narratives, opinions, news articles, procedurals. It's important to be mindful of what type of text you're summarizing to make sure you're capturing the important information of each type. So narratives have to have story elements and a plot. Opinions, they're going to have a great big opinion stated really near the front, and then there are different arguments and the details that support the argument. News articles are going to have the 5 W's plus how, and then bigger details and then smaller details. Procedures are going to have a main goal, a list of ingredients, and then an order for the steps. Informational is going to have a main idea and details, or several big ideas united under one main idea. So knowing that when I'm going to summarize, I'm going to make sure I've got those important elements in my summary, right? Sometimes when you're bogging down in creating a summary, it's hard to know what to prioritize, like what's important here. And one of the things you can look at is, well, what kind of text am I reading? So what's important about it? So I know that I include those important facts in my summary. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this is a little video on how to summarize nonfiction.
Hello, readers. Today I'm going to be
Oh.
talking about the skill of
All
summary,
right.
which you might be familiar with.
I'm gonna back up. Because there's nothing fancy, it's just kind of a guy talking. I will just kind of do the talking here. Hang on a second.
Today I'm
Okay.
going to be talking about
This
the
is the
skill
skill
of
of
summary, which you might be
summarizing.
familiar with in the
You
form
might be
of
familiar
summarizing
with in the form
stories.
of summarizing
It's like a
stories, like a
retelling, but
retelling,
shorter, and in your
This
own
is
words.
shorter, and
This
it's
is
in
an
your own
important
words.
skill,
And it's
summarizing
an
fiction,
important
but
skill,
it's not what we're
summarizing
talking
fiction,
about
but
today.
that's not what we're going to be talking about
This
today.
kind of summarizing
This
is
kind of
used when you
summarizing
want to
is
sum
used
up
when you
the
want to sum up
information in
the
a
information in a
non-fiction
nonfiction
passage, like a magazine article, a book,
like a magazine
news
article,
story,
or
a
book,
scientific
or a
paper.
news story,
Most
or
scientific
paper.
papers begin with a quick
Most
retelling
scientific
of what the
papers
paper's
actually begin
about.
with a
So
quick
say you're a
retelling of what the
scientist
paper's
and
about.
you discovered
So
a
say you're
cure
a
for
scientist and you
robo-flu.
discovered
Let's
a
say
cure
robots
for
can get the flu,
robo-flu.
first of all. And
Let's
the
say robots can
abstract,
get
the
the flu,
summary
for
retelling at the
example.
very
I'm gonna
beginning of
pause
your
it here.
paper about your cure
At the very beginning of your paper about the cure, it says,
says, hey, under these conditions, we learned that this medicine cures robo-flu. And then the reader goes on to look at everything else you've written in your long scholarly paper. So how do you do it? To make a summary, you will need your own words, the order of events or information from the text, and important details from the text. So what's not in the summary? Every last detail from the original text. I think I first read something like this in a Neil Gaiman novel, but here's the deal. Imagine you were coming to visit me.
Imagine you were coming to visit
And
me,
you asked me for a map of my neighborhood. Now, if I included every single detail in my map, who lives next to me, every tuft of grass under a tree, it would stop being a map and just become a one-to-one scale drawing of my neighborhood. In other words, it would be useless as a map. A summary is a map of my neighborhood with only the important bits in it. My apartment, a metro stop, Rock Creek Park. When we make a summary of a text, we are in effect making a simple map of that text. And it's your job to determine what details are necessary, the most needed. Like, say somewhere deep in that paper on how you discovered a cure for the robo-flu, you had written, it was raining on the cold November day, our team first identified the robo-medicine. Like, would that be an important enough detail to include in the summary? I'd say no. The big picture is that the team discovered.
You would absolutely not include that it was raining in a scientific thing in the first place, but you see what he's getting at. The big picture is that the team had discovered the medicine,
not that it was raining when it happened. But if the cure for robot flu involved garlic and motor oil, yes, that's an important detail because it relates back to the big picture. We discovered a medicine, and here's what's in it.
We discovered a medicine, and here's what's in it.
Let me summarize.
To conclude,
a summary is a short retelling of a piece of text with only the important details included. It's like a simple map of a place.
It's like a simple map.
You can learn anything.
You can learn anything. David out is the guy. I'm not David, obviously. Okay. So you can literally practice this by looking at any story online, right? Let me see. New York Times. Let me see if it'll let me in. New York Times. You can literally grab, New York Times Canada. That's odd. Any article and then start seeing, can you read and figure out what is important? Okay. This will have all sorts of articles. It will even, if you look, have different opinions, right? If I grab opinions, I can read about different opinions on stuff and try and summarize opinions. This is a great way to take some time, take a few minutes, and try and do a summary. I don't know if it's going to let me in, is the problem, because they always want money off of me. Let me see if I can grab this. Oh, let me. Okay. The Israeli, nope, it's not going to let me. I was afraid it would ask for something. Hang on a second. Okay. Let me grab the Ukrainian war. Just because I know there'll be lots of stuff about it. Let me think here. What could I grab? Okay. 2 Montrealers busted in New York for allegedly helping Russia's Ukraine attacks. Is this okay? So 2 Russian Canadians living in Montreal were arrested in New York City Monday for allegedly conspiring to illegally ship 13.9 million worth of restricted technology to the Russian military. Some of the components that the Montrealers obtained through front companies later ended up in advanced Russian weapon systems and spying equipment found on battlefields in Ukraine, according to Breon Peace, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Peace unsealed a criminal complaint that identified the 2 Montrealers who were charged in the case as Nikolay Goltsev, 37, and Kristina Puzreve, 32. A third Russian man, Salmadzhan Nazridinov from New York, was also charged. These defendants are alleged to have illegally exported millions of dollars in electronics to support the Kremlin in its ongoing attacks of Ukraine. Okay, so what is important here? Well, 2 Russian Canadians, that's my who. What were they doing? They were allegedly conspiring to ship a bunch of restricted technology to the Russian military when they were arrested on Monday. How? They obtained it through front companies and then later shipped it to the battlefields. Let me think here. I've got who, what, where, Montreal, but they were arrested in New York City. When, why were they doing it? It doesn't say, but I think the obvious supposition would be that because they have Russian heritage, they feel some sympathy for the Russian side of that particular war. There's more here. Now, here's that all the important stuff is up top because it's a news article. And then I would have to look through this part and try and decide what are some other things that are important that I would want to include in my summary. It's quite a long article. I can't include all of it. If I wanted to summarize this in just 10 sentences, what are some important parts that I would need to include? Okay, so that is a way to practice for the exam if you are getting ready for that. If you feel like you are close to writing the exam, please check in with me. Let me know that you're at that point. Let me know that you've got your assignments done, because I will go through and check and make sure you've got everything. You don't want to be in a situation where you've written the exam and then we find out that you forgot a major article. Let me know ahead of time so I can make sure, check that you've got all your assignments done before you write the exam, okay? We will finish up tomorrow talking about how to prep for the exam, okay? Thank you so much. I apologize for the delay today. Hopefully we'll be okay tomorrow.